Hi, this is Dan Scott. There's a lot of questions coming up about the Chrysler bankruptcy, and particularly the Supreme Court's decision to halt the sale of Chrysler in accordance with the President's plan in the bankruptcy. And so, since there's so much controversy about it, I thought I would take just a few minutes and describe what's really going on here. In this bankruptcy case, what's happening is different than what happens in a lot of other bankruptcy cases. You've got new people coming in and putting in what's called fresh money into the case. In this case, the government, the United States government, putting in over $30 billion. Canada is putting in 9, 10, or 11 billion, depending on what the what report that you hear. And then, so what's happening is specific assets are being sold basically into a new entity so that the creditors will only get a piece of the new entity. Now, what the big complaint here is that the bondholders feel like they're getting a raw deal. Well, let's talk about why that's the case. Well, the bondholders are secured creditors. That means they've got a lien on the assets being sold. In the priority scheme for bankruptcy, the first priority is the secured creditors. Now, certainly taxes are going to come in front of anybody else than secured creditors, but the secured creditors come first. In this scenario, that is the sale that's being proposed, what's happening is that the union, who is laying claim to Chrysler because of the pension benefits, are getting a big slug of the pie. Now, the union is they're unsecured creditors, that is, unfunded pension benefits or liabilities for pensions in the future. That's an unsecured claim against Chrysler. Now, it might have some priority basis as against unsecured creditors, but it doesn't have a priority over the secured creditors. And so what's happened here is that because of trying to jam this bankruptcy through so fast, the government is trying to basically shove the secured creditors out to the side and say, look, this is too important to follow the normal bankruptcy guidelines. Now look, we know that there's a problem with Chrysler. We know that the business either has to be sold or those assets have to be liquidated. But why is it that we have a bankruptcy system that everybody in the world, well, not in the world, but certainly in the United States, everybody in the United States has to live with? But when it comes to this Chrysler bankruptcy that the administration is saying, we're going to make this happen, they say, no, in this scenario, we're not going to follow the precedent, the law that's been in effect for everybody else. What we're going to do is, because Chrysler is too big to fail, we're going to write new law. And we're going to do it without going to Congress. Because you see, what's happened is they didn't go to Congress and get Congress to say, well, we'll amend the bankruptcy code, because you understand that if they amend the bankruptcy code, they can't just amend it for Chrysler. They've got to amend it for everybody. And of course, there's no big roar out there to say, hey, let's amend the bankruptcy code so that the secured creditors take a big hit, and unsecured creditors, in this case the pension claimants, those unsecured creditors step in front of the secured creditors. So why is that the case? Well, because the secured creditors are the banks. In this circumstance, they're bondholders, but think of it for, just analysis purposes as the banks. They say, I'll make a loan, but I want to have my hand on some assets, and we call that security or collateral. And the reason I wanted that collateral whenever I made that loan is I didn't want to get in a situation where the unsecured creditors, that is, creditors that do not have collateral, where they get in front of me. But you see, what's happening in this bankruptcy case, the government is trying to put the unsecured creditors, that is, the pension claimants, in front of the secured creditors. So when you hear all this fight about how can these bondholders do this to Chrysler, how can the bondholders not be reasonable, shouldn't they compromise? Understand that all the bondholders are asking for is, look, you follow the bankruptcy code. If these pension claimants are unsecured claimants, and it appears that they clearly are, then they should not get in front of me as a secured creditor as to the assets that I've got security on. Now, we might let them get in front of us on some unsecured claims, but as far as my secured claim, the bankruptcy code says I'm first. And so you can't come in here just because Chrysler is too big to fail and say, I'm not going to follow the bankruptcy code. I'm going to talk with you some other times about these things going on in the Chrysler case, because I want you to be able to understand really what's going on is really not just the fight about Chrysler. Because you understand, if the government can shove this one down the throat of the bondholders, and remember that the owners of those bonds, that is the investors in the bonds, are cities and governments and pension plans. Oops, pension plans? Well, maybe my pension's in there. I better go check. Look, I hope this has helped you. This is Dan Scott from growalawbusiness.com. Have a great day. Watch out for anybody that tries to shove a bankruptcy down your throat.